All right, a very good morning to you once again. You are watching Your World. My name is Zainab Ismail. We did take a short break from AM Live. We now shift gears to a conversation that's a little bit different. And of course, this is touching on the issue of donkeys here in the country, specifically on the trade of donkey hide. Of course, it's been a big issue. In fact, I did a special report a couple of years back on the issue of donkey hide trade and how that has impacted specifically communities that really depend on donkeys and hideous burden. You can find that on our website, ntvkenya.co.ke. And of course, this morning I'm joined in a studio by, I do have Dr. Raphael Kinoti, who is the Regional Director, Brook East African organization that specifically deals with the protection and welfare of donkeys. We also do have Dr. Monica Maichomo, who is the Director of KALRO, that's the Kenya Agricultural and Livestock Research. A very good morning and good to see you as well as Chris Wainwright, who's the CEO of the Brook Global. Thank you so much for joining us as well. Good morning, good to see you. And yesterday, by the way, we also saw the Queen, who is very passionate in terms of animal welfare. We'll be touching on that in a moment. She met about 14 donkeys and she spoke. Yes, yeah. And we'll talk about that. But just to set perspective into why this conversation is really important for us, in many African countries, donkeys are a very important aspect in communities, specifically in Kenya. I visited some areas in the northern part, and women rely heavily in terms of why, the donkeys are the ones who transport water from one area to the other. They carry, things for them to the market. But let me begin with you, Wainwright, just to set the perspective for us. The donkey hide trade. Where are we when we're talking about that? Because it's been a huge problem for in the recent years. It's become quite a huge problem for African communities. And where did we begin, and why is it such a big conversation for us?
Well, I think the beginnings are, it's used for a project called IJAL, which is primarily sold in the Chinese market. And I think you rightly say this is not a problem just for Kenya or East Africa, it's a problem across Africa now. And, we're lucky here in East Africa under Dr. Kinoti to be working to really eradicate the trade. And the Kenyan government has been very progressive in terms of trying to deal with those issues because they really affect communities, which you talked about. But it's an issue that goes across Africa, and it's going to require ultimately a solution that goes across Africa. And that means really it's a challenge for the African Union to try and come up with policies to eradicate this awful trade.
All right. Dr. Kinoti, regionally, when you're looking at East Africa specifically, we'll talk about the Tanzania change in terms of the policy, but Kenya still lags behind on that.
Thanks so much. I think, yes, in Kenya we have a few gaps that we need to fill in. But I think, as Chris has said, we must really congratulate the government so far. Because between 2016 and 2020, we used to have 4 donkey slaughterhouses in Kenya. Every day they would slaughter 1,200 donkeys. And actually, Dr. Maishomo is here, she'll be telling us the projections were that by this year, we'll be slaughtering our last donkey. If that trend actually continued. But then we must really thank the government that in 2020, April, the slaughterhouses got closed. And we must particularly thank the Minister for Agriculture and more so the Director of Veterinary Services in terms of actually not outright, or rather not licensing them to continue again. I know we still have a gap in that we can trade with the skins, and actually people can obtain donkey skins from anywhere and get to sell them. I think those are some of the policy gaps that we're saying actually the government needs to come up and actually close, because then if we still have a gap, there's an opportunity that somebody can train in a donkey skin and it looks legal, then where will they have gotten the donkey skin from if they would not have slaughtered the donkey? And we think this actually is a problem that is influencing the bush slaughter that we see these days. So yes, we have policy gaps. The government has made strides, and we really would encourage that we take this to its logical conclusion. Actually, what we've been saying as Brooke is the donkey needs to be removed from being a food animal in Kenya.
But you know, not very inspiring comments just the other day from our own Agriculture Cabinet Secretary, who said we could reopen one of the abattoirs that I believe was in Baringo County, right?
Baringo.
So then you have residents who feel the impact of even that statement.
No, that's true actually. And when the minister said that, I think you saw communities come up in arms and say actually that will be taking us back. Because then when the trade was on in the years 2016 to 2020, we lost 15% of our donkey population in Kenya. So you can imagine. In just a span of 3 years, 15% of the donkey population was gone. 2009 census gave us 1.8 million donkeys. 2019 census gave us 1.1 million donkeys.
So from 1.8 to 1.1 within just a span of
yes, within just a span of 3 years, 10 years,
right,
yes.
Right.
But then most of those donkeys actually went away in a span of 3 to 4 years.
Right.
So then you can see how unsustainable the trade is. And that's why I must really thank the DVS, because then he hasn't licensed, you know, he's refused to license those slaughterhouses simply because the slaughterhouses, when they got established in Kenya, they said they will breed donkeys for their slaughter. 4 years down the line is only 2 slaughterhouses that had bred 5 donkeys. So you can imagine. So they are doing nothing, going to communities and mining donkeys and actually decimating the population. That is where the problem is.
Right.
Well, you know, actually in Kenya, out of the whole population of donkeys that we have, 85% of them wake up every morning and go to support a livelihood in Kenya.
Right.
So we don't have donkeys for slaughter. Yeah.
All right. And Dr. Maishomo, I know KALRO has done a lot of research as well in terms of the impact of donkeys on smallholder farmers and communities. But when you're looking at that, some would ask then, why are farmers really holding on to donkeys when the world is changing right now?
Okay. Yeah, thank you. That's a very valid concern. And because the reason why the farmers still hold the donkeys very dear to them, it's of course because of the services they get from them. And some of these services they cannot get them from the motorized transport. I assume that perhaps that's what the world would think. There is so much technological advancement. Why do you still hold on to the donkey? But we are talking about farmers in the rural areas of Kenya,
Right.
and we are aware of the status of our loads, the terrain. Actually, if you go through the data, you find that 70% of the bad loads are in our rural areas, and those are the farmers we are talking about. And because vehicles may not be able, especially like now it's raining, that's a perfect example. So a car may not be able to get the milk from the deep interior from my mother's farm and get it to the cooling facility. The reason they want to use the donkey, besides that, the donkey does a lot of functions on the farm. It will be ready to ferry the fodder and the farm produce, the inputs and everything in a very efficient manner and affordable. Especially now we can see what the challenges are with the dollar, the economic crisis. So it's a very affordable animal and comes handy for our farming community.
Right.
Yes.
So it's certainly an essential part of the life-to-life, the day-to-day life
Exactly.
of these communities, right?
Exactly.
And Mr. Wainwright, I mean, when we're looking at the importance of really promoting the welfare of these animals, some would say, look, there's so many other important issues, pressing issues that, you know, that sort of needs to be addressed, you know, in the world, in our own communities. Why specifically the Brook is focusing on protection of these animals?
Well, it goes back to the argument that others have made, which is these animals are absolutely critical for the community.
Right.
And I agree with you, there are pressing problems right across all economies and countries, including in the UK. But when I've visited communities here, I've seen how important those animals are to the survival and the flourishing of those communities. So by looking after the animals, we help those families, those communities, those children get the chances that they need as citizens of Kenya. But I think there's also another point, which is about creating really good citizens. So we met children from donkey care clubs yesterday, and as indeed did Her Majesty the Queen. And what you're producing is young, compassionate, empathetic citizens who understand that animals are sentient beings, as well as being an incredibly important economic asset. So, you know, I don't think it's donkeys or other issues. I think it's donkey as part of other issues, if I could put it that way.
All right. And I mean, what's the significance of having actually Her Excellency Queen Camilla visit a donkey sanctuary here? And what does that signify in terms of enhancing the understanding and promotion of the welfare of, you know, an animal mainly just seen as, and I don't know if you've seen, you know, I mean, you'll pass along the road and you see mistreatment of these animals, I mean, being flogged and they're carrying hundreds of jerrycans on a cat that, you know, has been, they're carrying. And I mean, they're, what then would you attribute the significance of having the Queen give such high importance to these animals?
Well, I think it says that they matter.
Right.
I think that's the fundamental issue. I think by Her Majesty going and visiting and seeing the work, she's saying, actually, these are really important animals, like other animals. And she met a donkey yesterday who was blind in one eye, where his owner had whipped it, over-whipped it, and who was then cast into a pit and left to die because the owner thought the animal was unproductive. In fact, we've nursed the animal back to health, or Raphael, and the care of the KSPCA in Nairobi as well.
Right.
And that animal will now go to a community and be a really productive animal. So we've got to get through to some of the owners that actually, you know, these animals, if you look after them well, will be your companion and an important asset for you for many, many years.
Right.
And, you know, we've learned where young men give their animals their names, they start to look at them differently. So there's lots of little things that we can do.
So it becomes more of an intimate connection, you
Yes,
know,
yes.
a very personal connection to these animals, instead of just seeing them as, what do we call them, beasts of burden?
Yes.
Right? And I mean, Dr. Kinoti, then, you know, we've talked about this issue of the donkey hide trade, which is suddenly a really big issue. But with the fact that there's still a ban, right, in terms of that, that trade still continues.
That's true, unfortunately. But then we have to look at quite a number of factors here. And I'll keep emphasizing that actually it is important, it is imperative for the government to do the ban. Because the numbers that were being slaughtered then, and I think I quickly mentioned a few of the numbers, but look at this. Every day when those slaughterhouses are operational, 1,200 donkeys would be slaughtered every single day by the 4 slaughterhouses, officially.
1,200 donkeys.
1,200 donkeys
Right.
every single day.
Right.
That's how actually we were to finish our donkeys by this year. But then, alongside that, the slaughterhouses were influencing a lot of illegal slaughter. Because then the bush slaughter that we saw between 2016 and 2020, when the slaughterhouses were operational, we've never seen that. When they were closed, bush slaughter significantly went down. So there was a direct linkage between what they called legal slaughter and illegal slaughter.
All right.
In that actually most of the skins that they would obtain them from the bush, you know, and do quite a few in the slaughter. I mean, it was very, very clear from, you know, all sorts of evidence, from community reports, but then also from the reports that would go to police stations and all these. I mean, it was very, very clear. Of course, as I've said, as at now, we still have a challenge in the bush slaughter, because we have a small loophole that you can export a donkey skin legally in Kenya. So what actually we're urging the government is that now that we close the slaughterhouses, let's also remove donkey skin from the lists of skins that could be exported from Kenya. I think that will help a big deal. But then secondly, there is a big demand for meat in Nairobi. Huge demand for meat in Nairobi. Actually, Kenya doesn't have enough meat animals. We don't have enough cattle and sheep and goats. We get the bulk of our animals for slaughter from Ethiopia and from Tanzania. Now, when those supplies are not really good enough, then actually we've seen the unscrupulous business of selling donkey meat disguised as, cow meat in Nairobi. And that's why actually the whole issue of donkey skin trade needs to concern everybody, especially the Nairobians. We've had police in Deia, in Kikuyu, in Kitengela, arrest vehicles loaded with donkey meat destined for butcheries in Nairobi. And actually, this is meat that we've actually discovered goes to high-end butcheries.
So this is from your own research and investigation?
It is from our own research and investigation,
Right.
because then vehicles are being impounded. And on further inquiries from the people actually being arrested carrying this meat, where were you taking this meat? And they point to some of the places in Nairobi actually that are ironed. Please note that this meat is slaughtered in the bush, of course to get the skin, but the trader feels no, Nairobi needs meat, and so they actually debone the animal, package it in very, very dirty conditions actually, and get the animal here. This animal is not inspected. It's been slaughtered. We don't know actually whether the animal had rabies. We don't know whether the animal had anthrax. And some of these are
serious public health risk.
serious
Right.
public health diseases. And so that's why actually every single Kenyan
Right.
needs to think about the whole issue of the donkey slaughter. It's a bad thing, but huge public health problem
All right.
for everybody,
All right.
even the rich in Nairobi.
And Dr. Maishomo, certainly then it is not an issue of demand for donkey, hide outside the country. Then it brings us back to a conversation here in the country when we're talking about donkey meat sold as, beef here in the country, in some marketplaces here in Nairobi. What risk does it have, especially on public health?
Yeah, you rightly put it, and for me, I see it's the trend as people are looking for money, so they see an opportunity. Here is a market for meat, and the donkey is available, and so they exploit that opportunity. The risk, as alluded to by Raphael, is the unhygienic handling of these meat products. They are not inspected, and the laws of Kenya clearly stipulates Cap 364 about the Meat Control Act and about the hygienic handling, the inspection. It's a requirement for it to be properly inspected and passed for human consumption. Now, the risk with the bush slaughter and taking to the market uninspected meat, it's a public health concern because of diseases that could be transmitted to the consumers. So it's the entire continuum and narrative about the food safety and the health of the consumers in general.
So this certainly is a looming crisis if not addressed.
Yes, definitely. Yeah, the reason that every consumer, you and me and every consumer in Kenya needs to be concerned about this, because we want to consume healthy products is for our health.
And I mean, Mr. Wainwright, if you've heard from some of the reports, some we do receive, and many more that perhaps we don't, get to receive, is the fact that, you hear of carcasses of donkeys somewhere, thrown and found somewhere. So that means there's no hide. And the meat must have gone somewhere because they're fresh carcasses, right? So that's, from where you sit, your perspective on this issue of meat being sold, donkey meat being sold to Kenyans unsuspectingly, as beef would be a crisis in the making.
Yeah, and as colleagues have said, you know, Kenyans are being deceived there. They're being told they're getting some beef from reputable sources that's been slaughtered in the right way with the right hygiene controls. In an actual fact, what they're getting is some donkey meat that's been horrendously slaughtered in a horrible manner in a bush in conditions that none of us would think is acceptable. So yes, I think it's a potential health crisis, I think it's a moral crisis, and I think it goes back to something that if we don't tackle it will lead to a social and economic crisis, because you're going to be stopping local communities, particularly in rural areas, give themselves opportunities, and those opportunities will primarily be denied to women and girls. That's the reality of where the burden lies. And so, you know, we've got to take a holistic look at the whole issue to see how we can develop solutions. It's not easy, but it's worth doing.
All right. And perhaps another issue that would be captured with that is with us finding or getting the reports that carcasses have been found, is the issue of cruelty on animals as well. That means these animals have been slaughtered in a cruel manner. And even with the reports that we'd gotten back when these slaughterhouses were open, is the way they were, you know, slaughtering and killing those animals. We saw some pictures and videos of how the animals would be, you know, just taken to a small area, and it really didn't look good. How do we begin to address, you know, now that's not happening legally, but you know how even animals are being treated outside here, these donkeys.
Yeah. Well, it's an ongoing issue, and you're right to point out about the conditions that did exist even when the slaughterhouses were open. They weren't acceptable. People didn't treat the animals with any respect. And it's, you know, it's one of those things that I think changes over time. Those issues wouldn't be unique to Kenya.
Yeah.
Others have had them before and sort of said, actually, we'll change the system. But I do think one thing that will stop some of this trade is for some high-profile prosecutions of people who are conducting an illegal trade and who are then caught and held to account. And actually, if people know that trading in donkey skins illegally, using meat illegally, actually leads to significant penalties, I think they might think twice.
Right.
And then the consumer needs to put pressure on as well. But, you know, NTV giving us an opportunity to have such a rich conversation is another opportunity for us to tell people about those concerns.
Right. And Dr. Kinoti, I mean, animal cruelty is there. I mean, even when they're slaughtered behind the bushes back, for this illegal trade, it's bad for the animals, their mental state as well. And I don't think, perhaps many would say, look, they're just animals. Why do we care about the mental state of animals? But that's a big issue.
It is definitely a big issue, because then animals feel pain just like you and I. We normally say they are sentient beings, as in they're emotional, they feel pain. If you treat them badly, much as they are not talking back to you, they know it, they are feeling it, and that's why actually you get into a compound and find even a cat that has been treated well, you will know. It will be friendly to people. But a cat that's been hit and you know everything, you see it running from people. So it knows, it feels pain. It's only that when they can't talk, then everybody thinks, then they can't feel pain.
And even with the animals that we see, the donkeys that pull the carts, you see them every day, even along roads here in Nairobi. It's quite in a cruel manner. They're flogged very heavily, and it appears the law doesn't apply there. Where do you think the gap lies?
I think it's the priorities here, because let me say something. If you look at the developed world today, and I'm happy that Chris is here this morning. At some point in the stage of development of Europe, the horse played a critical role, big critical role. Actually, the First World War, even quite a bit of the Second World War, was fought by these animals. They worked so hard to take Europe where it is today, and to take most of the developed world where they are today. Africa, we are developing. And that's why actually use of these animals is critical. And if you look actually at the map of Kenya, you'll find out of the 47 counties, the map of poverty, where there is more poverty, that's where more donkeys are found. So it tells you actually that donkeys are working daily to get people out of poverty.
Right.
When they get out of poverty, probably they may choose to use another means. But for now, where we are at, a household is going 8 kilometers to get water, and you say they can't own a donkey? They need to own a donkey, actually. Otherwise, that jerrycan, 20-liter jerrycan, will be on the back of a woman. So choose. Is it a 20-liter jerrycan on the back of a woman, or 20-liter jerrycan on the back of a donkey? Is it a 20-liter jerrycan of water on the back of a child, or a 20-liter jerrycan on the back of a donkey? And actually, I'll say the major perpetrators of this trade are men, unfortunately. Actually, all the arrests and represent of the arrests of cruelty against animals is men, unfortunately.
Right.
Simply because, as you know, donkeys play the women roles. You know, they're getting water, they're getting firewood, they're getting, you know, things from the farm to the house. Those are not men's work in our Kenyan culture, in our Kenyan context.
And I remember
So-
speaking to a lady in Tanzania as well, from the Maasai community, who likened the donkey to a co-wife.
Can you imagine?
Yeah.
Yeah, they say actually it's a co-wife because then co-wives help one another.
Yes.
You know,
in that
it's-
sense,
it's
metaphorically
it's that
speaking,
intimate.
that's what she meant, right?
It is that intimate to some of the communities,
Right.
that sort of companionship.
Yeah.
I'm saying this so that then you're able to see the gender role in this. Actually, we've seen in arid semi-arid lands, when a household loses a donkey, the impact of that goes either to the woman or to the child. Is either the child will not go to school tomorrow to go and fetch water, or the woman actually, all her life will be shattered and all this. Flashing back in that way to come back to your question about the cruelty and why we need to take it seriously. When these cases of cruelty actually get noticed, because then we have, in Kenya actually we have law that is very, very clear. We have the chapter 360 of our laws. We have the penal code of our laws.
Right.
Actually, that prohibits cruelty against animals. But then, I know our law enforcement people are doing a very, very good job, but I'll say the weight that they put on somebody probably who has stolen a chicken against somebody who has stolen a donkey is different. You know, there's just a way that when you mistreat a donkey, the general psyche, even with the law enforcement, is it's a donkey. You know,
Right.
really not taking it seriously. That actually this person is breaking the law, and actually the necessary steps need to be taken, and the law is very, very clear. Of course, some of the penalties there, we've been arguing that they are very lenient. Probably that's why people are doing this.
Right.
But they are there. You can actually get yourself in for 3 months or even 6 months for mistreating an animal.
Right.
That is there in the law. I think our problem is awareness with the law enforcement and the general population. You know, if I went somewhere and found somebody actually hitting on another person badly and injuring them, I'll feel bad. I would want to stop. I would want to attend to that. But if I found somebody hitting hard and injuring a donkey and all that, I was, you know, it's a donkey. It's the awareness, it's the psyche of a country. I think we need to raise ourselves actually to that level where we're saying, these are animals, they are helpful. Actually, they are waking up every day to get our people out of poverty.
Right.
We need to think about them. We need to think about how actually we attend to them. We need to think about how we treat them in a humane manner.
Right. Dr. Mashomo, I guess you would agree on that in terms of how you treat these animals which play a pivotal role in the communities, and Dr. Kinoti has mentioned the gender role specifically, and you know how this has a huge impact on women, but really perhaps then we would have to begin changing the perception that we have on these animals, that they're not just beasts of burden, that we need to take care of them. When they get sick, they need to get medication. You cannot flog a donkey until it loses its eyesight. So then there's that change of how we view this animal differently, because the Maasai community would look at, their cattle, the cows, and if they get sick, what happens? They get injections. They get, they don't want the animals to get diseases, because if they get diseases, they die. But then this donkey, are we looking at it the same way?
I think I can't put it better than what Raphael has said.
All right.
Because he's really brought out clearly the centrality of the donkey, especially in the households, at the household level, and its role as a co-wife. If you visit one of the farming communities, you'll appreciate the burden that it has taken off from the women, who are actually the ones responsible for carrying the heavy loads on their back, and that has health implications. So I really agree with you that we need a different understanding and a different approach in terms of uplifting the health status of this donkey. And actually, one of our recommendations from our research data was that even at the county planning, the donkey should actually be planned for, just like any other animal that has been highly prioritized, because it gets sick, it requires medication, it requires all other issues, whether it is the implements that it uses to carry the loads, so that it's not subjected to pain in terms of the cart and how it is, it is padded. So all those things are required so that we can actually bring out the issue of the donkey in the community. I want to appreciate that the people who use the donkey, and particularly the women, they really value the donkey at the farm level. I think the challenge is maybe in the wider community, like those of us in the urban areas, we just pass by, the way Raphael has said, you see a donkey being mistreated and it doesn't click in you. But the people who at the farm level, in fact, when we were conducting one of our research, some of the farmers would say that without the donkey, even my daily enterprise is as good as dead, because for sure they are not able to carry the heavy load that a donkey would carry, and therefore make their enterprise very efficient and effective. So I agree with you that we really need to prioritize the health status of the donkey, take care of it when it is sick, and even above all, just adopt what we are calling in animal health these days, the preventive outlook. We don't have to wait for it to get sick. The beauty as per God's creation is that the donkey is really a hardy animal.
Right.
So it rarely gets sick. But when it does, we really need to attend to it and ensure that it is sound, so that it can really remove our people from the poverty.
Right.
Yes.
And on that point, we're going to take a very short break here on Your World as we continue with this conversation. You can engage with us on our social media platforms at NTV Kenya. The hashtag is Your World, at Zainab Ismail. We'd like to hear from you. We'll be back in a short while.
So fresh, fresh, fresh. Fresh all day.
Always fresh. Nivea Fresh Deo. Now with new InfiniFresh technology. Antibacterial power with 48-hour protection and long-lasting freshness. Nivea Fresh Deo. Feel fresh in every moment. Try new Nivea Fresh Sensation Deo. Our freshest fragrance with 72-hour antiperspirant protection.
Candace, what's that?
I brought you a small bonus.
Bonus for what?
You got us 299 family dinners, 64 kisses on the cheek, 12 road trips to see grandma, 42 jokes from daddy, 49 laughs from mommy.
In over 60 years of dealing with numbers, we've learned that the numbers that matter the most to you are the ones that matter the most to us. NCBA Bank. Go for it.
Going back into European competition, and into the Champions League no less, was a long time coming for Newcastle fans. So, the chance of a run into and through the knockout stages might leave some of them feeling a little greedy. Except Newcastle has put itself in position to do just that, even after suffering a disappointing home loss.
And people come in and they're like, oh, it works. I can have ice cream and I'm not in any discomfort. I recommend Sensodyne because it works. It's brilliant.
All right, welcome back to the program. You are watching AM Live this morning as we take a look at the issue of donkey hide trade and, of course, the impact of it, but also generally the welfare of donkeys, not just in Kenya, in Africa, but also globally as well. And Dr. Kinoti, what I know is that, in fact, last year in Dar es Salaam, we had the first Pan-African Donkey Conference that took place, and what that brought about was that there was a ban. Tanzania had has a 10-year ban on donkey hide trade, and also from that was the Dar es Salaam Declaration on Donkeys in Africa now and in the future, which recommends a 15-year ban on the slaughter of donkeys for their skins across the entire continent. Perhaps you can talk to us about that and what we're doing as at a continental level in terms of addressing this issue.
Thank you so much, Zainab. Now, when the issue of donkey skin trade, I want to give a flashback a little bit, because then I have the privilege of having actually gotten involved in the whole issue of donkey skin trade since when it began in Africa in 2016.
Mm-hmm.
So, the genesis is this. Between 2015 and 2016, the very initial African countries began getting these requests from Chinese traders, I would say, that actually is good to establish abattoirs and export the skin out. And it looked very lucrative. So between 2015 and 2016, around 15 African countries had already established abattoirs. Countries like Burkina Faso, Mali, Ghana, Kenya here, Tanzania, Ethiopia, you know, all over, even Botswana and South Africa.
Right.
Now, everybody was upbeat because then the narrative was, oh, Africa has not been trading with the donkeys, so then you've been neglecting a critical resource and all this. But then
so there was all this hype into this new market.
Nobody, with those traders, actually, they didn't say they wanted to trade with the skin. They told every single African country that they want to trade with the meat. You see now the first lie? And so, like in Kenya, when they went and slaughtered the donkeys, what the government actually was very concerned with is the meat. And that's what they really declared. Then they declared the skin as a worthless byproduct. While really, if you go to the market in China, the skin fetches 50 times more than the meat of a whole donkey. And so African countries came in, but then soon and very soon they discovered, oh, we don't have enough numbers. Because then, like in Burkina Faso, communities began demonstrating. In Ethiopia here, they demonstrated and they came and burnt the slaughterhouse.
Right.
In Kenya, by 2018, we had massive demonstrations by communities from Turkana all the way into the Kenyan coast.
Right.
Saying actually, now you're beginning to slaughter donkeys that we use in our household operations. This has gone on, of course, out of all those countries in Africa that eventually began the slaughter, up to now, 13 of them have banned the slaughter, saying actually it doesn't add up. In 2019, when Caro produced a report here in Kenya, they said, actually, a donkey that is alive is 15 times more valuable than a donkey that you've sold.
Right.
The value of a donkey that has been sold is 15 times less than the value of a donkey that is working. And so it showed actually that the whole donkey skin trade was draining from Africa. The blood of Africa was being drained by every single donkey skin that we were selling outside the Africa. And that's why actually the African Union, because the cry went all the way to the African Union, they convened a meeting in Dar es Salaam on 1st and 2nd of December last year that was called the Pan-African Donkey Conference. Actually, that went into thinking about these things.
Right.
Over 200 delegates came from the whole African continent, actually from outside the African continent. Papers were presented, heavy discussions for 2 days. But then eventually towards that, actually this trade is not adding up in Africa. It is not adding up because Africa doesn't know the maths of this trade. It's only the external trader who knows the maths. They are the only ones who know the value chain. They are the only ones who know how much, you know, every of the items is going for back in their country. And they're not willing to divulge that information to Africa. And so they're getting donkeys in Africa for a song and going and earning the lion's share from out there. And so the countries in Africa, the Dar es Salaam Declaration said, let's ban this trade. And the 15 years is saying that for these 15 years, let Africa search its soul and say, are we actually ripe for this? Because you cannot search your soul when you're continuing to slaughter. No. So let's stop it. Let's say Africa to review this trade, the whole of Africa. And that suggestion is actually at the African Union and is being processed. We are hoping that it will be endorsed by the heads of states in February next year, where an official ban by every of the AU member states will be implemented in Africa. And so it's a whole discussion in the whole of Africa, but then we've seen actually some of the regional economic communities in Africa ban the trade. There was a debate in the East Africa community, IALA parliament, that actually said the trade is not good for us in East Africa. ECOWAS in West Africa has already banned the trade. And so I think the nose is tightening. Africa is eventually seeing that actually the trade is has less importance in Africa, and the donkeys alive are better than donkeys that are dead and sold. And so that's the whole perspective in Africa. So it's a narrative that is really going on. I must most sincerely thank the African Union, especially AU-IBA, who have an head office, you see, in Westlands in Nairobi. They have really facilitated the discussion in Africa, and we can see light at the end of the tunnel.
All right. And certainly you highlight all the reason why this really needs to happen as soon as possible. And of course, also touching on another important aspect, I know, Dr. Maishomo, you have a report that would perhaps give us insights into the issue. I think not many people would think about this. It's part of, you know, the dairy production here in the country and how donkeys are also contributing into that value chain. Maybe give us an idea into that.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, in the whole debate about the donkey and its role and contribution to the economy, the challenge has been the data, to be able to differentiate whether is it activism for the pro-donkey bodies or are there facts.
Okay.
So our work as research is actually to generate data that can be used as evidence to support policy decisions.
Correct.
Whatever the government will want to do to promote the welfare of its citizens. So in collaboration with Brook here, and because part of our research mandate, we also address the issues of animal welfare. And so we set out to collect data regarding the role or the contribution of the donkey in the dairy value chain. You know, Kenya is very strong in the dairy, and we have said that in our rural areas, because of the challenge of transportation and the road infrastructure, the donkey is a key asset in the production context. So between November 2021 and February 2022, we set out actually to collect the data in 3 counties in Kenya. That was Nyandarua, Bomet, and West Pokot County. So what were we looking out for? We just wanted to know how the donkey is relevant in terms of the dairy production. So that data we were able to collect with the donkey users and the key stakeholders. We were involving the county livestock personnel, and therefore the data we were able to get was actually very critical in terms of highlighting the contribution of the donkey. So we were the question we were asking is, between those who are using the donkey and those who are not using in their dairy value chain, is there a difference? At the tail end of our analysis, we were able to realize that those who are using the donkeys, actually their revenue was 1.7 times higher than those who are not using the donkey. There are other factors perhaps we were not able to gather because of the limitations of the study, it was shown, but nevertheless we were able to come up with the fact that the donkey was the most important mode of transportation for the milk from the point of production. In fact, because the biggest collection is the cooperatives in those counties. So actually, the donkey was even much more important than the motorized transport, which these days is the motorbike. Actually, we were able to see, like in Nyandarua County, even when there is a tarmac road, the donkey was still able to ferry the milk even along the tarmac. That tells you what? It's about the efficiency of the system.
All right.
Yes. So those were some of our findings, and of course there are reasons for that. So actually our recommendation at the tail end, because of the data that we were able to get, was a recommendation to the county. And remember, I've said we were working with the county officials, how they should include promotion of the donkey in their county development plans in terms of promoting its welfare and including its health and everything else that goes with that, because when they give attention to the donkey, they are actually promoting the dairy, and it was very important, particularly in actually in all those counties. Actually, it's only in Bomet we were not able to understand why the donkey was not very, there wasn't so much use of the donkey, but virtually in Nyandarua and West Pokot, actually it was the most important mode of transportation.
Right.
Yes.
So, I mean, that's quite interesting when you're looking at that, Mr. Wainwright. And for this reason, then, I guess perhaps the only currency we can be able to give to donkeys is making sure that their welfare is taken care of. You feed them well, you know, you give them a good place to stay, you know, you provide with them clean drinking water if possible. But then at the end of it all, as you know, as we make our winding remarks, the brook really has a strong history behind it. We know, maybe you can just tell us a bit of history on about Mrs. Dorothy Brooke as well, and why this was such a huge part in terms of founding the brook on the issue specifically of taking care of donkeys.
Yes, so Brooke was created 90 years ago next year.
Wow.
And Raphael
almost
mentioned,
a century.
Yeah, Raphael mentioned the role of horses in the First World War particularly, and even some in the Second World War. And that was why Brooke was created, because Dorothy Brooke found loads of these animals left in Egypt who had been neglected. You know, they were animals used by the British primarily.
So largely all equines.
Left,
the equine population.
Neglected, yes, and you know, they'd given enormous sacrifice, and she decided that these animals needed more respect and their welfare should be looked after. So she created the brook. And 90 years later, I'd like to say that all our work is done, but we've still got work to be done. And, you know, Africa, we've made so much progress, but not Brooke hasn't, African citizens have. Brooke just helps those communities, you know, develop the skills and the knowledge that they require. But these days we work in Central America, we work in Asia, we obviously work across Africa, and our role will continue till we're not needed. But the role of every charity is hopefully that we will get to the day where we won't be needed. And I am sure, you know, looking at Kenya now and the way that it's developed, there will be a time where donkeys are used for purposes which are a lot less strenuous than some of the things they're engaged in now. But while those things exist, Brook will carry on existing, and look forward to working with Kenyan government, Kenyan stakeholders, Kenyan communities and owners to try and create a better future for those animals. But as importantly, and it's really important for us at Brook, we want the communities to thrive. We don't just say we care about the animals and not the people. We care about the people, the owners, because we know without those animals they will suffer.
It is interconnected.
It's interconnected,
Right.
you know. One wins, they both win. One loses, they both lose.
Right.
And, you know, it says a lot about a society when you say, you know what, we're not going to let abuse of animals take place, because it says a lot about us as individuals.
Right.
And we know that people who abuse animals also abuse other people,
Right.
because that's the proven thing that's happened in the UK and other places. So, you know, let's stop it. Let's give these animals the life they deserve, but let's also then give Kenyan people and others in Africa the opportunities that they also deserve.
All right, and we're certainly look forward to, you know, that change, and I think I spoke about that change of perception on how we really look at these animals and how we view them as just, they're not just beasts of burden, they're much, much more, and they're a lifeline for many people in different communities, not just in Kenya, but in Africa as well. But thank you, Dr. Raphael Kinoti, who's the Regional Director, Brook East Africa, Dr. Monica Maichomo, who's the Director of KALRO, that's the Kenya Agricultural and Livestock Research, as well as Mr. Chris Wainwright, who's the CEO of The Brook Global. Thank you so much for joining us this morning, ladies, gentlemen. I hope we can have this conversation once again and take a look at, you know, the status of donkeys even after next year in February. All right, we'll see if those resolutions really, you know, would get implemented. But yeah, that's where we leave it at that. Thank you so much for watching Your World, holding brief for Winnie Lubembe. Of course, you enjoy the rest of your viewing, and good morning.